the number of people who can work in Latin America is in decline, and it's weaker compared to other emerging markets. Population growth and policies to address employment and productivity are key challenges for the region. Latin America's workforce expansion, which surged by nearly 50% pre-pandemic, is now going in the opposite direction. Demographic shifts are projected to dampen economic growth, with an average annual growth rate of about 2% over the next 5 years. That's below historical levels and weaker compared to other emerging markets in Europe and Asia. Population growth is also decelerating, with a projected annual decline from 1% to 0.6% in the next 5 years. As the region's population ages and the share of the working age population peaks, governments face challenges for sustaining labour force growth. To mitigate these challenges, policies focusing on boosting labour force participation, particularly among women, through initiatives such as expanded childcare programmes and vocational training are crucial. Additionally, efforts to raise labour productivity growth by addressing governance issues and business regulations are essential for maintaining living standards amid demographic headwinds. For more on this, let's bring in William A. Booth, who is a lecturer in Latin American history at UCL Ipswich in the UK. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Good morning.
So, Professor, what's, in your opinion, the situation now and the economy in the Latin American nations as a whole? What's the outlook, first of all?
The outlook is a period of, all else being equal, like absent other global shocks, they're probably going to have slow but steady growth over the next few years. And this is being seen as a problem by many commentators, certainly relative to other regions in the developing world. But historically for Latin America, this is not a terrible situation. The 1980s and 1990s were dismal economically. There was the big boom of commodities from the mid-2000s through to the early 2010s. But 2.5% annual growth for Latin America over the, if you look at the last 50, 60 years, that's not terrible. And a period of economic stability might not be the worst thing for the region, to be honest.
What can be done right now to address these quick shifts in demographics and population age that are taking place, to be fair, not only in the Latin American economies, they are taking place all over the world, especially in Europe. But what can be done, in your opinion?
I think one of the main focuses here is on how do you get young people into work, how do you get women into work? And so one of the big problems you have in lots of Latin American economies is the historic legacies of certain companies, certain pseudo-monopolistic or oligarchic practices within domestic economies. And so there are reforms that could be made, but the way that people are tackling this in certain places like Argentina, there was an attempt to do this in Ecuador as well, but that was defeated in a referendum, is to very rapidly liberalize labor markets, and that of course leads to wages going down and lack of stability and so on. So there's a real balance to be struck here between changing the shape of the labor market, which is contracting but not dramatically, I would say, and doing something which protects people's social safety nets.
Many of these countries in Latin America, Argentina, but not only, are actually also dealing with very high rates of inflation. Is there anything that can be done, do you think, to support the local currencies or the pegs that some of these currencies have with other major currencies?
Yeah, well, Argentina is really an outlier in terms of this dramatic inflation. You have seen some quite high inflation in Venezuela, but when sanctions were taken away by the United States from Venezuela, the currency actually stabilized significantly. Now, those sanctions have come back in, and so Venezuela is going to face another period probably of fairly significant inflation. In other places, inflation is not too bad. In many parts of the region, it's in the sort of 3 to 5% area, which is historically, again, not too terrible.
Professor William Booth, thank you very much for your analysis, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.